other names, Mahesh Sharma, there is a complicit silence by the Prime Minister till now, and today there is an endorsement by not changing them at all. After all, every time a preaching lecture is given to us in some third-party speech abroad that, oh, we stand for secularism, inclusion, but no concrete action ever taken, no droppings now, and no changes in all probability. Okay. So I think this is a very strong message of endorsement. And lastly, I think, Pawan, this Prime Minister has perfected the art. One part is, you know, the entire cabinet is largely superfluous. He is directly dealing with the bureaucrats. Today, if I am a minister of X, I come to know of a decision after the file has been reviewed by my junior joint secretary in my ministry, who is called directly by the PMO. That's the style of functioning which was perfected in Gujarat and is now sought to be applied here. It is actually something anathema to our very system.
Mr. Singhvi, you made a good point. Before I take a break, I want to bring in Siddharth Bhatia from Bay and put another aspect of it to you, Siddharth. Other than Prakash Javadekar, there isn't a single other promotion in the cabinet or the ministers of state. What does that tell you of the quality of the ministers that the Prime Minister didn't at the end of 25 months think it proper to promote anyone else? And the second thing I want to put to you is that other than the 6 or 5 that he's dropped, there are many who embarrassed the government. Their names have been read out earlier on. Sadhvi Niranjan Jyoti, Giriraj Singh, Sanjeev Balyan, General V.K. Singh, all of them continue. So is it not strange, A, that no one other than Javadekar was thought worthy of a promotion, and other than the 5 who are dropped, serious embarrassments still continue despite the fact that they often regularly embarrass the government? What do you make of those two twin things?
So these are very good questions. As far as Prakash Javadekar is concerned, I would call it a case of the dog that didn't bark at night, because there are very competent ministers. Piyush Jha is clearly one of them, and they would have been promoted. But Prakash Javadekkar's promotion is actually extremely significant, because he is the man who is in charge of the no development zones, forests, and this government's thrust has been on clearing land applications as far as possible. And he has been doing a good job, and I say a good job from the government's point of view, from industry's point of view. So in fact, this is a reward as far as Prakash Jha is concerned, to show that this government will continue on the path. Somebody mentioned the NGOs. It's not only the NGOs. Okay. A lot of people are saying...
But go beyond Prakash Javadekar, Siddharth. What about the fact no one else has been deemed worthy of a promotion? What does that tell us?
As far as the other concern, yeah, exactly. So clearly they are perhaps, I wouldn't say not worthy of promotion, but they have been, the message has been sent that, you know, you remain at whatever place you are, because we don't want you to rise. If I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say that they do not, the party, the government does not want them to grow too fast.
All right.
This is what I would think.
Let's take a break.
But I have no evidence for it.
Let's take a break at that point.
As far as the other names you're concerned, you kept on saying embarrass the government. Do we want to come back to this? Because
no, finish quickly, because I want to take a break.
The embarrassment of these five ministers. You might think that these people have embarrassed the government. Are you sure everyone else thinks that? So maybe they are doing what they are supposed to be doing.
That's a very good point. You have a telling point there. We may think it embarrasses the government, but the Prime Minister may think differently. Let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to turn to what this reshuffle tells us about Amit Shah and his influence, what it tells us about Arun Jaitley and the argument that his influence is diminishing, and about the Prime Minister. We'll be back in a moment's time to tackle those three aspects of this reshuffle, and perhaps, with luck, we might even have a few portfolios announced, because we're still waiting on tenterhooks to find out who's got what and who's been reshuffled around. See you in a moment's time, and keep your fingers crossed. Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. We're discussing this morning's cabinet reshuffle, which the Prime Minister prefers to call a cabinet expansion. Mr. Mittal, there are two impressions that have emerged from the way this exercise has happened. First, It seems that the new people who were taken in were vetted, perhaps even identified by Amit Shah, and he's emerged as not just the head of the party, but the second most powerful person after Mr. Modi. And the second impression, although no one has specific proof to back it up, but the second impression is that the importance and influence of Arun Jaitley has diminished. How do you respond to both of those?
Before I respond to this, because there's an analogy, I just heard Mr. Singhvi talking about the absolute concentration in the hands of the Prime Minister. It's a one-man government. Mr. Singhvi, you should be very happy if it's a one-man government, because then it is the least government. Maximum governance and least government, because according to you, rest are all irrelevant, only one man works. So that it should make you happy. And Prime Minister is then living up to his promise, na?
Now
what are you complaining about?
Now come to my question.
The fact is,
come to my question,
you have a party and you have a government. Yeah, I'm coming to your point now. We have a party and we have a government. There is absolute interaction between the two to formulate how we should go forward. Normally, people accuse that, look, when the government is there, the party is neglected. Here is a case where the government and the party are in unison, and both are doing things together to ensure that BJP goes on a victorious path. I think that's the message out of this, which we should be welcoming. As far as the third, this thing that someone's influence has been reduced, and you said there's no evidence. Once there's no evidence to that effect, why make a comment on it also?
All right, that's a fair way. That's a fair way of turning my question on its head. But let me bring in an independent person like Nalini Singh, who's sitting with me. Do you share the impression that Amit Shah has emerged from the way this exercise happened as the second most important person, and that the impression that Arun Jaitley's influence and power has diminished is perhaps correct?
Let me answer the first one. I believe that this exercise of who will be inducted, these 19 members, that this has been going on for about 2 months in Delhi between only two persons, the Prime Minister and Amit Shah. And many times they've had meetings which have lasted hours and hours. So I would say now, when you see what's really happening, even today you saw that the Prime Minister and Amit Shah were very comfortable with each other. If you've been together for 30 or 40 years, this is how you look together. So I would say, yes, the answer to your question is that the most important person in government and in the party is Amit Shah.
What about Arun Jaitley?
I would not like to speculate. I think one can just see if the Information Broadcasting Ministry still stays with him. Does that mean that he had too much of a burden? Does that mean that he wasn't able to perform in the Finance Ministry as well as...
So you're waiting for the portfolios before you answer the question about Jaitley?
And I would say that there is an interesting thing. I think Mr. Singhvi should be told one small thing.
Well, not just about that. This is not about Mr. Singhvi, forgive me. This is about the expansion. But I will bring in Mr. Singhvi, because the point, Mr. Singhvi, that was made, that the Prime Minister has become almost dictatorial, I think those were the words you used, was rebutted on your behalf by Mr. Mittal. Are you being unfair in saying that a Prime Minister is dictatorial? Because after all, increasingly all over the world, Prime Ministers do tend to be. And given that the prerogative of who they keep and who they dismiss is theirs and theirs alone, it's an easy charge to make, but a difficult one to back up. Do you want to back that up? Mr. Singhvi, go ahead.
The real ruler and governor is that person who... The real ruler and governor, Karan, is that person who may have the prerogative to be dictatorial, but is most democratic. It is clear to anybody who has seen the style of functioning of the central government and, in fact, the Gujarat government, that Prime Minister Modi is a one-man show. And pardon me, but since when is a one-man show a new definition of maximum governance, a minimum government and maximum governance? Mr. Mittal seems to confuse a one-man dictatorial show with minimum government and maximum governance. What is happening is that from secretary of the ministry downwards to joint secretaries to directors to even lower than that, first and foremost the appointments are made directly by the Prime Minister. They are handpicked by groups by the Prime Minister and mostly from Gujarat. Secondly, files are called directly. Thirdly, decisions are reviewed directly. Fourthly, the minister in charge comes to know, if he is lucky, just before the announcement is made, sometimes even after the announcement is made. And let me tell you one thing, Karan, as I conclude, that there is clearly a sync completely between Mr. Amit Shah and Mr. Modi. I agree with you 100%. And certainly the base of decision making and inputs earlier, when the original cabinet was made, was with one or two more people. And today it seems that only Mr. Shah and Mr. Modi are privy to this decision making. So that partly answers your question.
Siddharth Bhatia, there is another element of this reshuffle that we're beginning to discover this afternoon and evening as the reverberations from the Shiv Sena begin to dominate the news. The Shiv Sena is deeply unhappy. In fact, the Shiv Sena has said this is an this is a BJP cabinet expansion, not an NDA expansion. They boycotted the ceremony. They're not involved in any number at all that's been added to this list. Is that a problem that the BJP is lining up for the future, both in Delhi and Maharashtra?
Well, the Shiv Sena and the BJP, as we have seen in the last year or so, and a little more, have been at loggerheads. The sniping levels have been going up steadily. The tone and the pitch, as well as the content of some of the things that have been said, mostly from the Shiv Sena side, are really strong. The Shiv Sena is gearing for the municipal elections, which are crucial. So anything that unless the Shiv Sena was offered something dramatic, it would have been like this. So there was some word that Mr. Anil Desai would be made a minister, but you can't expect, after sniping at the Prime Minister himself for a year, to be given these kind of favors. Secondly, by bringing in somebody from Maharashtra, who happens to be from the Republican Party, you're not going to, you've already finished the Maharashtra quota. So I think the Shiv Sena being unhappy is more or less par for the course.
Okay.
What is important is how this will continue to grow in the coming months.
Absolutely, and that's a good question to lodge in the air for the audience to ponder over. I'm going to come back as we end this show to this critical question about the imprint of the Prime Minister on his government becoming sharper and more solid. I'll go first to Pavan Verma and I'll give the last word to Mr. Mittal. At the end of the day, when a Prime Minister's imprint on his government becomes stronger and more clear, that's usually considered a good thing. Because that's the Prime Minister exercising his authority and ensuring that people who work with him and under him are loyal and therefore they do what they're told. Why do we in India perceive that as an exercise of dictatorship? It would be considered in England, if Cameron did it, as proof of his control and his authority. We take it as dictatorship. Are we right to do that?
Karan, I feel that concentration of power and a Prime Minister leaving his imprint on the cabinet are two different things. If there is an imprint of a Prime Minister on the functioning of a cabinet and the Prime Minister has a vision and a viable and sustainable model to deliver it, so be it, and that should be the case in democracies. His primus inter pares. But if that imprint reduces itself to, as I said earlier, a disproportionate concentration of power, which in itself becomes an obstacle to governance, marginalizing ministers and creating bottlenecks in delivery systems, then you can question it. Secondly, if concentration of power also leads to the loyalty test in every matter, did you notice, Karan, where Amit Shah was sitting? You have been a veteran journalist. How many times has a party president sat in terms of protocol next to the Prime Minister?
All right.
There is something happening here which is unprecedented. And that is the reason also, I believe, that allies are being treated in this manner. Because there is the Amit Shah, Narendra Modi stamp, which is BJP centric, which is not about leaving an imprint, but about monopolizing power.
Let me then put that point to Mr. Mittal. Mr. Mittal, I asked a question about the Prime Minister's imprint being perceived as a dictatorship. You've got an answer that actually picked up particularly on the nature of the relationship and the growing power and influence of Amit Shah. And the point that Mr. Verma made to illustrate the growing power of Amit Shah was to say, unprecedentedly, he was sitting just beside the Prime Minister at the swearing-in, something that party presidents have not done in the past. And certainly, I will add that in the days when Mr. Vajpayee would have swearing-ins, none of his party presidents sat beside him. That is unique and unprecedented. Do you want to respond to that?
Sonia Gandhi sat by him.
First two things, concentration on of power and dictatorship and all this. If a Rahul Gandhi tearing of the agenda of the cabinet or the decision of the cabinet and the Prime Minister meekly accepting it is what is acceptable to Mr. Singhvi and Mr. Verma as democratic or as glorious institutional illustration of the Prime Minister's authority, then I rather have a dictator than to have this kind of a lame duck Prime Minister. A man who has been chosen by this nation has been given a mandate and an authority and a job. And if he's doing that with all his might and all his competence, grudging it by the opponent itself is an indication of the righteousness of what he is doing.
Okay.
Because the opposition comes not on the merit of what is being done, but out of the frustration of the success of the Prime Minister.
All right,
that's
Mr.
one
Mittal,
side of the story.
I'm going to have to...
The second side of the story...
Wait, Mr. Mittal, you've only got 20 seconds now because I'm running over. I want you to have the last word, but keep it a short word, sir.
Of the elevation of Amit Shah is what you all talked about. I mean, here is a perfect example of harmony between the party and the government. Look, it's a party which is voted in power.
All right.
And the government represents what the party aspirations are.
All right, Mr. Mittal. So this what?
Critical about it. That shows how perverseness has crept into our minds. Being critical about everything and anything which is being done by any government.
That will have to be the last word, Mr. Mittal. I will have to end there. We're running over. I wanted you to have the last word because you felt, I have to add wrongly, that it was 5 against 1. So you were forgetting that Siddharth Bhatia and Nalini Singh are not party political. They're independent journalists. And obviously we have to have 2 opposition people there. So it wasn't 5 against 1. But nonetheless, I want you to have the last word because I don't want you to be aggrieved. My thanks to all my guests for joining me, and if you have been, thanks for watching. Keep watching this channel. Hopefully shortly, the portfolios will be announced.